Hello and welcome back to Like Maria. Today I'm going to talk to you about another poem of the decade. It's going to be Vicki Feaver's The Gun. So this is really useful if you're doing A-level Edexcel literature. Let's get started. So on one level, Vicki Feaver's The Gun is quite a straightforward poem. When I first read it, there was something a little sinister about bringing the gun into the house, and it reads as a narrative of a domestic environment that is being invaded by a weapon. So you have the lovely check tablecloth and the gun is laid on it, and gradually the gun becomes more confident and the person in the house becomes more practiced with using the gun. Straight away, bringing a gun into a house changes it. We know that this poem is going to talk about some aspect of change. There's going to be something in the status quo that is altered throughout the poem. And this progression towards change is initiated by those adverbials. At first, da da da, soon, da da da. So those adverbials, at first it's just practice, soon the fridge fills, are charting the progress of the gun. Another interesting point about the progress of the gun is that we are addressed as the audience generally in the second person. You lay it on the table, your hands reek of oil, there's a spring in your step. And then in the final stanza, I join in the cooking. So there's a progression there to talking generally about what happens in the house when a gun is introduced, to the I join. I have taken ownership of the gun. I have somehow embraced the gun and I am taking part. And you will see if you read that last stanza that there is a joyfulness in it. There is action, jointing, slicing, stirring, tasting. Those progressive verbs. There is action happening. Excited. The king of death. Sprouting golden crocuses. Something is produced at the end. The king of death makes things happen. So first reading is the basic reading of a gun is coming to the house changes because there is hunting, this changes the environment and this changes the atmosphere of the house and in particular the atmosphere of the kitchen, and it also changes the person that is dealing with the gun. Now obviously it's not just a poem about that, and I feel there are two other readings that we can have from this poem. Firstly is the sexualized reading, the reading that the domestic environment is indeed being invaded and that the gun is a phallic symbol, a symbol of introducing a sexual relationship, and that this whole poem can be taken as a metaphor for the change and development of a relationship. The sexual act would be bringing the gun into the house and considering it and talking about it, and then I have embraced it fully. It's something I want to do. I join in the cooking and slicing. There is action and I am enjoying the sex of this relationship. So I think that is a really significant reading that we can have here, and it can't be avoided really because it actually talks about that simile in the 1, 2, 3, 4th stanza, like when sex was fresh. And I think the gun is really focused on here as part of the male anatomy. A gun brings a house alive. So we have that single line, what's termed as a monostic, kind of represents the male phallus. And after all, the phallus is what creates things in terms of offering life with the female in order to create something, to bring something to life and to create golden crocuses. So it needs to be part of the relationship, it needs to be part of the act in order for it to produce something. So that is my second reading, the idea that bringing the gun into the domestic setting is a metaphor for the growth of a relationship, a couple perhaps deciding to take things further and to commit to the excitement of a new sexual relationship and what that will bring. Things are changed by that act is what it is saying. My second idea here, and it's kind of building on that first one, is that we can look at this invasion of the domestic space in terms of the biblical story of Adam and Eve. So what we have is the gun representing the apple, or representing sin, or representing, in fact, as it does in the biblical story, transpire, death. That because Adam ate the apple that Eve brought to him, so goes the story, death comes into the world. And I think we could take this as a reading of this poem as a prelapsarian paradise. That means a paradise of the Garden of Eden before the apple was eaten, before the tree of knowledge was dabbled with, before Eve listened to the serpent. And we can say that everything was fine. There was a lovely kitchen table and there was a green checked cloth. But as soon as the gun comes in, i.e. the act is done, Eve has spoken to the snake, she has eaten the fruit, and she gives the fruit to Adam. As soon as that is done, things change. And God is disappointed with Adam and Eve. And here we have things being problematic for them. They find it exciting to begin with, and nothing particular happens. They join in the cooking, the jointing, the slicing, but ultimately God judges them, and the king of death comes, and the king of death is then present. So traditionally in Christian theology, the idea is that this is how death and sin was brought into the world, that Adam and Eve turned away from God. They introduced the words, the ideas of Satan and the eating of the forbidden fruit. They introduced sin into the world, and therefore they were condemned to toil, and they were condemned to be the enemy of the serpent, and they were condemned to death. And it was then that Christ had to come to redeem them from death. So on a further level, we could take this poem as something that ruins a paradisical existence. Something bad is brought into paradise. But at the same time, I think here there is a reading that actually it wasn't too bad, because humanity struck out on its own. And at the end of the poem, there's something very positive. There is a black mouth, but it sprouts golden crocuses. So here there is the idea that golden crocuses are a very positive thing. But again, is it that kind of farcical golden crocus thing that when you shoot a gun, there are bullets and they bring death, but actually in some kind of stage magical settings, you can shoot the gun and flowers come out, or something ridiculous comes out. So there is a complexity to that image at the end that I find very troubling. Sprouting golden crocuses, it's springtime. But it's the king of death. Those things, there is joy in being the king of something, but the king of death with their capital letters there is surely something troubling. So there are my thoughts on Vicki Feaver's The Gun. See you next time.